Brilliant. Good evening, everybody. If you'd like to grab your glass of wine and take your seat. We're under bright spotlights tonight. It's turned into quite the moody evening session with this Liverpool weather to greet us all. But thank you very, very much for making it over and joining us this evening for what should be a really hearty discussion. We're here to talk devolution, or taking back control, as the Labour Party has framed it. And what does that mean? What does that mean from a ministerial perspective, fresh into government? Does the Labour Party suddenly put the brakes on devolution or go even faster and further than before? And then from our colleagues and partners at Local Trust who are partnering with us tonight, and indeed Frida, who comes from a big local as part of the Local Trust programme. My name is Zoe Billingham. I'm the director of IPPR North. We're based in Manchester and work with regions across England on both regional growth and devolution. And we're really delighted to have you here. And our fifth panellist has just turned up. Hello, Andy. Hi. Hi. We're just kicking off. Make yourself at home. So in terms of this evening's proceedings, obviously, I'll just give a bit of a background and introduction to tell you where we come from as IPPR North and with our partners at Local Trust. So obviously, the new government has so far really steamed ahead with devolution. On day 2, the Metro mayors were in number 10. And I think that was a really great signal and a really good start for the new government. We then heard in the King's speech about the English devolution bill that will look to set out the framework, although I'm sure we'll hear more from Jim about that tonight, about how they are going to approach devolution. And of course, devolution is no small question now. We have moved from niche to the mainstream. In the north, 90% of people live under a devolution deal. In the rest of England, it's just over 50% and growing. So really, this is a mainstream issue now. So the real question is about the impact, how we do it, and how far it goes. So I'm really interested in a variety of questions, which I'll be turning to the speakers to give their reflections to start with before we open it up for a conversation. But in particular, I've asked the speakers to talk about the success of devolution, success so far, what success looks like. Andy, are you wired up? Would you like to? Oh, bless you. No, come on, come join us, Don't be shy. I don't have you as a shy guy. The success of devolution, how do we know it's working so far? The politics of devolution, obviously with the Labour government and the majority of Metro mayors Labour, are we about to see a big falling out between different parts of the Labour Party at different tiers of governance, or is this a harmonious relationship? And of course, the ambition and frontiers of devolution. We now have some combined authorities that are very early in their journey, like the East Midlands. We have others like Andy's Greater Manchester, who are really at the frontier of devolution. So how do we reconcile these two worlds? And also, finally, of course, the government has repeatedly set out its missions for government. And we're really interested in how those missions and the mayors come together and the role that mayors can play in delivering those missions. And then last but no means least, what impact is devolution having for communities? And it's really exciting to have Frida here tonight to speak about the relationship between community organisations and combined authorities. So before I hand over to the panel for opening remarks, I will just give you a brief intro to each of them in order of appearance. We'll first hear from Jim McMahon, MP, who is, of course, the Minister of State at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, as well as the MP for Oldham West, Chaddesden and Royton. We have Andy Burnham, who is the Greater Mayor, whoops. Take that back. The Mayor of Greater Manchester since 2017, re-elected just this year. I'll then be handing the mic to Matt Leach, who is the Chief Executive of our partners, Local Trust, a place-based funder of community organisations, before handing the mic to Frida, who is part of and very much a leader of one of those community organisations. So we'll be hearing straight from government through to regional government, through to really what it feels like on the ground. And then after we've heard from each of our panellists, I'll throw it open to the floor, maybe with a few chair questions for you to fire away with your questions. So without further ado, Jim.
Well, first of all, thank you for braving the weather and coming over. I love this museum, by the way. It was even better when they had a Ford Escort in the foyer, but it's been removed. I've no idea where it is. But it's still worth a visit, even if you miss a Ford Escort. I'm really delighted by the amount of traction that we've had in such a short space of time in government, but also just how much devolution and local government is featuring in part of the conversations that are taking place in and around conference. I don't think it's ever been as comprehensive, covered by so many different organisations with so much interest. I mean, probably thousands of people have attended different conversations about some of this. So apologies if you've heard this before, but it's worth saying again, that we are absolutely determined for the English Devolution Bill to be a landmark piece of primary legislation that will rewire power in this country. And that's about rewiring the role of the central state, rewiring the power of our metro mayors and combined authorities, rebuilding the foundations of local government, but creating a platform across regions and pan-regions where those metro mayors can come together to really challenge the centralising state that we've been subjected to. But we want to make sure that it is an offer for the whole of England. And we are unashamedly pro-mayoral devolution and pro-mayoral combined authorities. And I know that for a period of time, many areas will say it's just not quite right for us. Our history, our geography, the type of local government that we have in a particular place means that mayors might work in an urban setting, but they don't quite work here, or they might work in that part of England, but they don't quite work here. It's the same argument you could deploy for saying, well, MPs can't work everywhere, can they? Or councillors can't work everywhere. Of course it can, and it can be made to work. The question for us, and the test of the English Devolution Bill is, are we making the prize so big that those local tensions and historic grievances are maybe put to one side because we made the prize so big and attractive that why on earth wouldn't you want to run towards it? That is important because for as long as we have greyed out areas of the map where we haven't got mayoral devolution in place, you are always going to have a role for central government departments to say, well, you are always going to need us, you see, because what about Cumbria? They haven't got a mayor. What about Lancashire? They've not got a mayor. And Cheshire? Everyone loves Cheshire. You've got to have a Department for Education that responds to Cheshire. Well, actually, no, we need a devolution settlement that responds to Lancashire, Cheshire and Cumbria, now joining Hull and East Yorkshire to complete the north of England. We need the same population marshalling across the Midlands, and we need to see them growing out across England, across the south and the east as well. When we do that and we build out that level of devolution for our regions, we can then create proper devolution to our regions and sub-regions that break up a centralising model that we have in terms of decision-making and the way that funding is marshalled. But we're very keen for the English Devolution Bill not just to be a power shift from the centre to the sub-region. We want devolution to go hand in hand with localism. And that means that every community should see the benefit of devolution in their area. There's some fantastic examples of where mayoral combined authorities and councils are making this real. On Friday, actually, I was in Oldham for a visit where Johnny Reynolds, the business secretary, was there. And it was the opening of the Hive, which is basically a social enterprise business support incubator centre where the council have provided the seed funding. The mayoral combined authority has got it as a priority, as part of its town's priority, making sure that the towns as anchors of their community are really elevated in place planning and investment. The social enterprise runner is there, but also the Oldham Business Leadership Group are there. And it's just a real example of how all that is singing together to create something that from a local economy base will make a huge difference. Because part of the danger is, from an Oldham perspective, we're on a big hill on the foot of the Pennines. You look down any street in my constituency and you see the red lights of Manhattan skyscrapers, and we love Manchester, honestly. We are so proud of this thing that we have created, that we are very proud and connected to. But the growth has got to be felt in every community across Greater Manchester. I know, Andy, you've talked about this in almost every contribution that I hear. Because devolution only matters if it reaches people in the places where they live. And so talking about devolution and shifting the power from the centre to the regions are important. But we need to talk about community power, community ownership, community power at a local level, so people really do feel agency in the places where they live. The final thing I'll say then is, if that rests on a foundation of local government that's going bust, it's not going to work. And so as much as we need to do the structural devolution, and we're absolutely committed to do that because we won't deliver the missions of the country if we don't have that structure in place, we've got to get on with the emergency response to financial distress in councils and making sure that money's going to the right places for the right demand pressures. We also need to make sure that we deliver on our promise for multi-year single pot settlements to stop this cap-in-hand relationship, because some of it is structural, but a lot of it is cultural. We have created a parent-child relationship. Now, some of that is funding, some of it is more, and we might come out in the question and answers about some of the other things that kind of create that dependence there. But if we can create a fair funding model that gets money where it's needed, so every council can deliver a good neighbourhood service on top of the targeted people services that it has to deliver, so people feel pride and confident about the places where they live, we can begin to repair, and it will be essential to get to the end of the Parliament, and people know that with this Labour government, after a decade of feeling that our place was going in one direction only and it was downhill, we suddenly feel optimism about the place where they live. We feel confident about the places where we've invested. And that really is councils and its neighbourhood and its communities, and it's coming together to empower everyone to work together. So it's a big agenda. We're absolutely committed to delivering it. And the how, which is as important as the what, is through co-production. So I don't know how it's been on your diary, Andy, but I'm sure if you counted the number of times you've been called into meetings with number 10, number 11 with our department, for education and the rest of it, for conversations about how do you make the missions real and how can we support our mayors. In a way, the showcase piece about being in number 10 around the table was important, because I've been around at every area to say, why weren't you around the table, Lancashire and Cheshire and Cumbria and other places? The seat is waiting for you to join that relationship. But actually, a lot of the work about co-production is being taken place in the background, and we've committed through working groups that we will co-produce the English devolution bill, so it's fit for purpose and it delivers on the promise of devolution as well as the headline.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that shows true commitment to me. I do have one slightly cheeky question. It's almost evening. People have got a glass of wine in their hand. In England, every mayor is Labour apart from Ben Houchen. So how do you feel like your working relationship is with Ben Houchen?
Well, good. I mean, Ben was at number 10. He was around the table, and we're pretty clear. Part of the reason why Greater Manchester has worked for so long is that we've always had the view we will work with any party of any colour in any part of government or any part of industry to make it work. And that kind of maturity of relationship is one that we've carried through to government. Yeah. And you remember, 10 years ago, the devolution deal was signed with a Conservative Chancellor, Conservative council leader, I think in Trafford, at the time. And we were there and said, if it's right for our place and it gets money to the people that we care about, then we'll do a deal with anybody. Yeah. And my expectation is that most people in most places will put party loyalties to one side, because in the end, we're all in politics for one thing, and that's to make a difference to the people that we care about. And that offer is there for Ben as much as it's for Andy and the other mayors too. And, obviously we'll be fighting very hard for mayoral combined authorities that are Labour-led. But who knows what people in Hull and East Yorkshire will do any more than people in Greater Lincolnshire, because they'll be going to the polls in May for their first mayoral election, joining UK mayors to drive forward growth and further devolution. Yeah. So, it's an open door for anybody in any part of the country, of any party, to work together.
Brilliant. So, Andy, how are you going to build on this momentum and push yet again at the frontier of devolution?
Well, I just want to say at the start, isn't it brilliant, everyone, to hear a minister talk with complete conviction, passion, experience. You were signing that devolution deal 10 years ago. You were there way before me, as I said yesterday, and now you're in this role 10 years on, and already you're proving to be an outstanding force as a minister in this government. And it's, for me, Greater Manchester MP, someone I've worked with over for a long time, I just think there's something really happening here at this conference when you hear a minister of that level of experience speaking like that, with the power to make something happen. Somebody who's going to be overseeing the English devolution bill. Let's not underestimate, everybody, the significance of that. That piece of legislation will tilt the British state for the first time in our lives towards the regional and local and away from the centre. That is massive, and that is something that many people in this room have called for through the years of successive conferences, and this does feel like a change conference for devolution, doesn't it? And I would want to pay tribute to those. I know there's lots of think tanks with fringes on devolution this time, Jim, but let's recognise the ones that were there from the start. Centre for Cities, who I did something with, I praised them this morning, but IPPR, Zoe, IPPR North have been with us on this journey.
20 years, well before it was trendy.
Well before it was trendy. So that's recognised, and we appreciate it. So what can I say as to where we are in this moment? Well, I'm going to tell you something now that will really, I think, convince you that we've moved into a new era, a more confident era for English devolution. Because I've just come to you from the second meeting of the Liverpool-Manchester Railway Board, which has just appointed Hugh Merriman former rail minister in the Conservative government as the chair of our partnership board, because we are serious now about showing how we can deliver infrastructure for our region in a way that we've been promised by governments in the past, but they never came good for us. The North West is going to do it for itself now, and we're going to bring forward a new way of doing this, more bottom-up, more place-based, more about how the infrastructure, what does the infrastructure enable, which is something that the Department for Transport never seems to think about. They just think about the infrastructure and not what it's meant to bring about. And that, I think, is a relevant example because it's a sign of the level of confidence with Steve and I, having been around for 7+ years now. You know, absolutely we are ready and able now to move forward in a much more confident direction and actually correct some of the things that Whitehall doesn't do properly. And infrastructure is a very big one on that list. And you kind of would almost think, well, this is, wow, this is a completely new world. But can I just remind everybody here that in 1824, May, that was the first meeting of the first Liverpool-Manchester Railway Board, and they delivered the first intercity railway line in the world, commuter rail line between these two great cities. And so it's taken us 200 years to come all the way back, but we are here now. And it is about a completely different way of running the country, as Jim was just saying, a rewired country where power is distributed and everywhere's got agency. Just think about that for a minute, about how different that will feel as a country where we're not all just bidding and begging and please can we. You know, that's the lives we've always lived in the north of England, and you know we're just beyond that now, aren't we? We're just not having that. It didn't deliver for us. It was demeaning, and it's left us with a massive north-south divide. Well, you know what? We're now going to use what we've been given and change things and make the 21st century a very different one for the north of England than the 20th century, where Steve and I, in a book that's available at outlets in the conference centre,
hang on,
we kind of wrote this, you know, that somewhere in the 20th century, Whitehall, having kind of hoovered up power from local government and kind of centralised a lot of things, decided, without any reference to anybody here, that the northwest of England couldn't be very much in the 20th century, and it just kind of started to put us into some form of managed decline, or kind of maintaining a sort of, well, you know, that has got to come to an end, and we now need to take what's happened and we are still in the early days of English devolution, let's be honest about that, but there is now an evidence base that says this is the right way to go. Greater Manchester is growing faster than the UK economy. It has been doing now for a number of years, and it's predicted to continue to do so in the years ahead of us. Productivity is growing 3 times faster than London. I've not been able to say that in my lifetime until recent times. In fact, the opposite was happening. We were growing more slowly than the rest of the UK economy, hence that north-south divide was getting bigger. But finally, it's not, and what's changed it? Devolution has changed it. And the development of an integrated public transport system, perhaps chief amongst it. So devolution is working. We've got a government that doesn't need to be persuaded of that now, that believes that. So you can begin to feel how, in this parliament, this country could change more than in any parliament before it. Because it isn't all about the government, as important as they are, and support them as we do. It's not all about them anymore, whereas it always was in governments of the past. The governments I was in, the Blair and Brown governments, it was all about the government, really. Local government, even then, didn't have much ability to do much for itself. And hence, all the weights constantly on Whitehall and Westminster, all the dramas that go on there. Yeah. Well, actually, we're breaking out of that. We are breaking ourselves out of that way of running things. And it would just create a much more functional, practical, I would say, more positive country, because people will feel a sense of agency that they just haven't done before. I would say that explains the result that Steve has got here in his 3 mayoral elections, and if I might say, I've achieved as well. Because, Jim, we absolutely religiously go on that place first rather than party first. And that is the big difference between devolution in England than Westminster, where, you know, Westminster comes it the opposite way, doesn't it? Party first. And you know what? Perhaps it's not surprising then we don't build consensus and allegiances that kind of move things forward. Well, actually, if you come at it the other way, we've discovered that, you know, you create a very different atmosphere, more pragmatic. It is the Greater Manchester way that Jim described, and I'm just continuing that. But you create a safer space for business to walk into. A place-first approach is better for business. It's better for everybody. It aligns everybody in the same direction. Yeah. However they vote, and I think we're proving that. And now we take this approach much further. I think you were saying where next, so Zoe, I'll finish my remarks by just sort of pointing to the things that I think we need to start to talk to the government seriously about. I would want to now go towards the Whitehall silos that are the outliers, really. DWP are very much in my sights. I would like, in my ideal world, to have a situation where all Job Centre Plus in Greater Manchester were renamed Live Well centres, where we move away from the punitive, sanctions-based approach of that system, and we move towards a much more enabling, positive approach towards supporting people, working through local community and voluntary organisations, not anonymous large corporate entities, in spending that money better to get people back to work. And here's the big pitch I'm making to Rachel Reeves. When you've got a place-based pot that is the Greater Manchester budget, and it's going to an integrated settlement next year like Wales and Scotland, the more you route through that pot, the bigger the returns for the public money that's going in, because you can join the dots and you can make more of what you've got. You can link the employment support budget to the adult education budget, which we already control, and all of it starts to make more sense. Steve Rotherham needs to pay his bills, doesn't he?
This is austerity.
I think he needs some fiscal devolution, I think, which what I was going to come on to after that. I think we do need to be in a position going forward where it's not just, can we have yes or no from the Treasury, and if it's no, we're then back in a sort of depressed place. I'm in the middle of the biggest overhaul of public transport outside London that probably this country has seen in decades, the B network. I can't accept a situation where the rug can just be pulled from under us. I understand the pressures on public finances and on the Treasury. We will be making the case strongly leading up to the budget that we need revenue support for public transport outside of London in the way London has had for years, and particularly in the middle of this big change programme that we're going through. But it can't be the case that there's just a yes or no to that. We've also got to have the ability to raise more for ourselves so that we're not sort of just beholden to, you know, the whims of Whitehall. I would look first to a tourist tax as a sort of first step towards fiscal devolution, because every other big city around Europe charges one, well, pretty much all of them. We all pay them when we go on holiday. It's not something that should cause people any concern. We've had a voluntary one introduced by our Manchester Hotel Group in the city anyway, and that's come in without any great issues. We would want to include Airbnb. So just starting down that road of fiscal devolution, so it's not all in, you know, the hands of Whitehall. And the last one I'll just touch on is education, because I can't justify anymore how you can have an education system that's been academised and outsourced and separated from everyone else in the single public services in Greater Manchester. I can't justify anymore an education system that is excluding far too many young people from secondary school in Greater Manchester every year. I can't justify an education system where I see way too many young people in pupil referral units in our city region. We have to get back to a local, a reasonable but significant local role in the way in which education is structured and organised. So there are definite where next for devolution. I could say more. I won't, Zoe. But I'm feeling now that we are entering a new and the most exciting phase of English devolution. Personally, I think Scotland is in the wrong place when it comes to devolution, because they've hoovered power up to Holyrood, and I don't think in the 21st century that that gets you to a net zero country. I think change is going to be led through cities and from the bottom up, and that is absolutely the future. And actually, all the roundabout debates we've had on this, England has all of a sudden found itself in the right place with the right foundations, with a government that's saying, right, we're going to back this and we're going to do this. Yeah. So it's exciting. I think we're leaving Liverpool when we do later this week, really uplifted by what lies ahead. I would say to everybody in the room, as Jim said, put aside these parochial doubts. One of the biggest, I like a lot more about local government than I experience in national government, but the thing that does my head in is the parochial nature of it. I just think you've just got to leave that behind. You've got to look at the bigger picture. You know, the more that we're all filling in the map, the more that the whole of England has a devolution deal and a mayor, we won't need Whitehall anymore. We'll just start doing things with each other, ourselves, raising money together, borrowing, bringing forward schemes together. That is a completely different country to the one any of us in this room have ever lived in. I can see Zoe wants me to finish, but hopefully that's a hopeful note.
I'm hard agreeing, though, Andy.
Get with it, everybody. Put it all aside. Do the deals with Jim, and let's get on where everywhere in England is powering forward with a good devolution settlement.
Brilliant. No, thank you for such an impassioned pitch. No, it's brilliant, and obviously your leadership on this agenda has been more than significant. And Jim, at least you know what you're going to be asked for at budget now.
I've made a note.
Jim's shopping list from making everything she comes to.
It just gets longer and longer, though, Andy. That's the thing.
Because I think we've been on 2 now, and there's at least 2 things on here that wasn't on the previous list.
Oh, there you go. It's going up.
but it's all like common sense takes you there.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Brilliant. No. Brilliant. If we may now link to the community aspect of this, because Matt, you run an organisation that sees big locals. Is it in 150 different big locals?
50 different, I guess, largely left behind and peripheral neighbourhoods, often in sort of northern post-industrial towns on the edge of towns in the West Midlands that perhaps once had rich social fabric. Yeah. So they didn't just look to local government. They looked to the trade unions, the shared workplace. They had pubs and clubs, places where people came together. They had their own inherent power as working people collaborating and coming together to make stuff happen. And I mean, it's interesting here, isn't it? 'Cause you sit out at the heart of this amazing regeneration zone, and not far away. I was just before the election. I was in Northwood, which is in Kirby, and it's what was an overspill estate for Liverpool. There are a lot of overspill estates for Manchester as well. In fact, Frida comes from one of them. We'll talk about them. But when you go to Northwood, you find a community which, when you compare it to Liverpool, and Liverpool has its challenges, it's got 3 times the level of youth unemployment of Liverpool. It's got 20% higher crime rates, 30% higher violent crime rates. It's got 40% more people report themselves as being ill or in very bad health. A third of the population have no qualifications. It's a community that's struggling, and it's a community that, even if devolution delivers all that's promised, will be one of those that feels like it's coming up last because it's got such a distance to go. And when I went there, what I found was some amazing, brilliant local women, people doing much of what Frida's done, who got together. They were local mums, and they thought, we got to do something about this. They came together. They go to the Liverpool football ground every day because they've got a training ground next door to the estate, and they collect the disused food from the footballers who they get a choice of 3 great meals every day. They chuck away the other 2, and those meals feed 60 families on the estate every week. They collect food from elsewhere. They talk to the police. They find out the kids who are going to be excluded or arrested and reach out and find out what's wrong in their homes and try and sort it. They put an arm around their back. They've been trying to create a new community centre to make up for the fact that the one that was there is pretty much on its last legs. They would do anything for that community. What's strange, they call themselves the Shave Shifters because actually they met through a weight loss programme, and then they stopped doing the weight loss programme and started trying to transform their community. And for me, what it really brings home is the extent to which, in an environment in which there are challenges facing. That's all right. I frightened him away with mention of Liverpool. If I'd used an example from Manchester, it would have been great. But what it really brings home is is what Jim said, which is that for devolution to succeed, it can't just stop at the town hall. It's got to look to harness the power and potential of everyone, and it's also got to deliver something for those communities that feel like they've gained least from the economic and social and political settlement of the last 20 or 30 years, and make them feel part of something that's capable of delivering change. And I think to do that, you've got to do a lot more than simply looking at the division between Whitehall and the Town Hall. You've also got to think about how you share power in the broadest sense out into other communities. And you've got to learn, I think, from what's worked and what's not worked in the past. If I was going to highlight something that's not worked, it would be the last 10 to 15 years of post-big society policies, which sought to engage with the community sector, but didn't engage with communities in the sense of place. So when you look at things like asset transfer, great on the face of it, but actually what we've seen through Mark Gregory's report for Jim is that most of the £200 million of asset transfer money spent by the last government went to communities that were middle class, that were doing okay, that had lots of community organisations that knew how to apply for stuff. It didn't go to the places which actually needed support and would need support for 4, 5, 6 years to build strong communities, or build the community organisations that are there to the point where they can take on those assets. There's a real risk that a community rights agenda as part of devolution that doesn't also incorporate support for those places that are furthest to go will just create another axis of inequality. You know, it'll privilege those with pointy-elbowed activist groups, and for those places that have lost a lot of their civic life. So the places, again, often in post-industrial areas that got a bit of regeneration, but they never had support to rebuild the social fabric that underpinned their lives, that they'll miss out. I think, secondly, what's really important when you think about devolution and about new settlements, either at a regional or a local level, is thinking about it in the context of that ever-increasing demand on the state, coming from demographics, coming from economics. What we can't do is set up these new institutions to fail. They need to be put in a position where they will succeed and succeed brilliantly. But when you look at communities which have been stripped of their social fabric, when you look at the compounding impact of a loss of social capital on deprivation, you see that you get places like Northwood, where when you compare like for like in terms of deprivation, you see that they're suffering way worse than, you know, often inner urban deprived areas when it comes to health, when it comes to education, when it comes to the experience of crime. In fact, when it comes to those issues which are right at the heart of the missions that Labour is setting for itself. And I think the third point, and I talked about learning from the past, is that, you know, we can look at what went wrong over the last 10 years. I think Labour needs to be willing to really assertively look back to what it did really well in the past as well. And earlier today, I was sitting upstairs with Hilary Armstrong talking about the launch of her Neighbourhoods Commission. But you can see when you look back at the last Labour government, it came in, when it launched its National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal, it accepted that the challenges, the pledge cards, which were about crime, they were about education, it's the same stuff, yeah? The stuff that needs to be fixed again. That stuff was epicentered. Those challenges were all concentrated in the same places. Now, slightly different places from where they're concentrated now. But when we look at the places that most need Labour to make a difference, they are the places that have been hollowed out as a result of deindustrialisation, that have lost their social capacity, their social infrastructure as a result of austerity. And turning that round is going to require a similar amount of mobilisation. Now, it will be done in a different institutional context. You know, the National Strategy for Neighbourhood Renewal was all about this Whitehall department will do this Whitehall department will do that. We now need to think about how we incorporate a devolved state. But alongside that, we need to think about how we build community institutions as a part of it, that we create powerful communities. And finally, just going back to Northwood, one of the things I learned when I went there was that not long, a year before, so in February 2023, there'd been an attempted burning of an asylum seeker hostel. Several hundred people turned out because they heard that there were Muslim paedophiles there on social media. A number of them were sent down for a long time. It's about half an hour's walk from the community centre. I met those people. And, you know, people did that probably for the same reasons that what happened this summer happened. It's been going on for a while. But for places that feel that they've been doubly disadvantaged, that they've lost out, they haven't been delivered for by politics, by economics, by whatever deals are done between Whitehall and the town hall, those people fall prey to forces of, you know, radical and unpleasant dissent, you know, at best reform, at worst much worse than that. And I think as we start to tell the story of devolution, we start to tell the story of community power, we need to think about how we prioritise addressing the challenges facing those areas so they feel they're back, they're part of it, so that they understand why metro mayors are important and why their local authorities delivering, and they feel they're working in partnership with them. But the starting point is building. I'm going to stop now because Frida can talk about what's happening in Sale West, but building those community institutions that feel a part of it.
Thank you, Matt. And may I just ask you very briefly, if I may, and then bring Frida in, like, when you look across your 150 big locals across the UK, is there a tangible or difference to places that have a devolution deal, or do you think that's a work in progress as to how
I think it's
community and mayoral combined authorities work together?
I think it's a work in progress, but you can see some incredible examples. So if you go to hear Ed Miliband say out his vision of net zero, almost every single speech he will mention Lawrence Weston, which is a community that we supported, where we helped build the social fabric that then turned into a phenomenal community business that then got its own wind farm and solar farm and is now funding projects right across the community that are just getting better and better. They've got now an amazing new community centre that's going to transform the lives of people who live there. But that didn't just happen because we were providing, you know, we provided a few tens of thousands of pounds every year for 15 years. Long-term support is important. It also happened because the Labour Mayor of Bristol was willing to partner up with that community. It was willing to give them land. It was willing to give, Marvin was willing to give them a chance. Yeah. And I think having enlightened local government that's willing to work with local people to build their capacity and to trust them with resources, but also to trust them with the support that they need to make the most of that opportunity is going to be really critical for that part of the devolution story to be a success.
Thank you. No, that's really clear. And last but by no means least, Frida, what's your experience of running a big local and where do you see it fitting with devolution?
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Frida Eden, and I'm co-chair of our Sale West Big Local, which is a community group based on the Sale West estate in South Manchester. So we're back to the Manchester Collective, I'm afraid. Anyway, I'm here tonight to represent the grassroots level of community involvement and to give you a flavour of what one of the biggest social experiments of recent times has taught us over the past 11 years. So thinking about what to say to you tonight, certain words immediately sprang to mind. First of all, risk, then trust, support, and empowerment. And these words form the backbone of my presentation to you tonight. So first of all, let me very briefly tell you about the Sale West estate. It was built in the early 1970s by Manchester City Council. And in its early years, it was known as the jewel in the crown of Manchester's overspill building programme. It developed into a strong community of around 3,800 residents, virtually self-sufficient with shops, a pub, an outreach church, and a thriving community centre. However, due to various factors, it slowly began to go downhill. And over a period of 30 years, most of these amenities disappeared one by one. Problems developed with drugs and low-level crime. The shops had been demolished after a murder took place in the local off-licence. The transport links were very limited and unreliable, making it difficult for residents to get to work, shops, or entertainment. It became known as the notorious racecourse estate. and many taxi drivers refused to go there. So, despite being situated only streets away from some of the most sought-after avenues in South Manchester, some of the houses there go for several £1 million, the estate effectively became an island of deprivation in a sea of affluence. So, who on earth would want to take a risk on helping such a place? Well, in 2012, a group of residents heard about big local funding and decided to put in a bid. And much to their absolute astonishment, they were successful and discovered that they were to receive £1 million with very few strings attached to use over the next 10 years as they saw fit to make the Sale West estate a better place to live. To this day, we and 149 other deprived areas around the country owe a huge debt of gratitude to whoever it was who decided to take that leap of faith and to trust local people to be the best judge of what priorities should be set for them. Of course, we didn't receive £1 million just like that. We had to form a partnership board, consult residents, do research and make a coherent plan before getting the final go-ahead from Local Trust, the body who oversees the programme. In 2015, we began to make a difference, a major difference. The feedback we received from our community concerned 4 main areas: young people, environment, health and well-being, employment and training. We appointed a project development manager and had a great deal of support from Local Trust by way of training and expert advice. We set up ways to regularly communicate with local residents, for example, an office open door policy, an information hub, family events, trips out, a youth club, a lunch club for seniors, a regular newsletter, and a social media page. Success bred success. Our confidence grew, and we discovered so much talent out there that had never been given a chance to develop and flourish. We were developing a voice and began to feel empowered. Pride was returning. By the time COVID struck, we had developed such a strong relationship with the local health centre, local schools, the council and social services that the council did not hesitate to ask us to become the support hub, not only for our residents, but in fact for the whole of Sale, some 134,000 residents. Since then, we've built on this. Our track record has convinced the council to seriously consider granting us a minimum 25-year lease on the community centre, which has changed out of all recognition from a broken down building to a thriving hub for all sorts of services and activities. To date, we have delivered at least 75 separate projects under our 4 aims. One proof of the turnaround is that over the past few years, a sizable waiting list has developed for properties on the estate. The big local model involving risk, trust, support and empowerment has, to my mind, and that of many others, been a startling success. So, my main takeaway points for you tonight are, firstly, invest in your communities. I think money's been mentioned before, it's very important. Don't write them off. It will cost money initially, but in the end, save and even generate money. For example, over the past 10 years, we have used our £1 million to bring in an extra £600,000 thanks to building up a successful track record. Secondly, our experience has proved that if you enable people to cover their basic needs, enough food, sufficient heating, a decent roof over their heads, you will unlock their potential to contribute to their communities and society in general. Let local communities be your eyes and ears. Get out from your offices and go and visit community groups such as ours. Listen to and work with them. Don't second guess their wants and needs. So, take a risk. Trust, support, and empower them, and we will all reap the benefit.
Brilliant, thank you. Such a clear and heartfelt with incredible results, so really massive congratulations on your work. I'm about to open the floor up to questions. I did just want to briefly come to Jim and just say, you know, obviously what Frida and friends and colleagues were able to achieve was as a result of the initial kind of seed funding, if you will, from Big Local. How do you see that in terms of the kind of state-community relationship? Like, would you say, you know, the state should continue to fund things like that, or where does that balance, how does that look like to you?
Well, it was the IPPR report actually that kind of really focused in on the loss of community assets.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a result of austerity, but 75,000 community assets, losing £15 billion of public asset value, has disproportionately affected areas that could least afford to take the hit. And if I think about Limeside, which is an estate where I live, it's where my son's friends are, it's where he will play, very deprived, big issues with knife crime and gang activity. But when you look at the community infrastructure there that's been lost in the last 10 years, it's the youth centres closed, the libraries closed, the police posts are closed, the GP practice is closed, the housing office is closed. Everywhere you go, the bits that used to bind it, but what's been left is a community organisation around the old football social club that was derelict, that the community has said, well, we've got nowhere else to go, we've got to do something with this. And they're organising now to that. So there's a boxing club in there that's taking young people off the estate and diverting them away from trouble into that. The council using it as a family hub and the rest of it. I would say, if you were to ask them honestly, they would say they've done that despite government and the system helping them. They've had to go through hoops in terms of planning permission, in terms of uses, in terms of neighbourhood complaints about parking, you name it. It's been quite difficult. But we believe in my politics, of course, is Labour politics, but it's also cooperative politics. I chair the Cooperative Party, a Labour sister party, for over 100 years, and I believe in the power of communities coming together, self-organising and co-producing the solutions to it. And I don't believe that any community is waiting for a handout, but I absolutely believe that many communities need a hand up. And it's the state's job to give people a hand up. What does that mean in practice? The English devolution bill didn't start off as the English devolution bill. It's my geekery that's imposed that on it. It was actually the Take Back Control bill originally. And that was intended to answer the question about why people felt so disempowered in the places where they live. We had Brexit, we have the fallout of trust in mainstream politics, we had the disconnection that people felt, and people were shouting at the system, and the system was willfully ignoring what was taking place in many communities. Well, the Take Back Control bill was meant to address that fundamental question about community power. So within the English devolution bill, aside from the devolution stuff, will be community power. It'll be about what councils are doing to create community structures to bring the community together with delegated powers and budgets and a sense of community collaboration. It'll have greater powers for community assets. So taking on community assets with an enhanced community right to buy, extending the period from 6 months to 12 months to give people more time to organise. And of course then the capacity building, because why was areas like Limeside so badly hit? It wasn't because the community were indifferent about its own community. It was because there wasn't the capacity to support those bids. And actually one of the bids that came through wasn't approved for the community ownership fund because it didn't meet the criteria. And we had another panel debate earlier on, really fantastic organisation, and their experience was exactly the same, of trying to jump through the hoops of different funding applications over here, here and here. And when they were asked, but what is your business model? And they said, we just want to do something in the estate. We don't quite know what it is yet, but let's just get people in the room, and that's progress. And a lot of the funding doesn't want that. It wants, no, tried and tested, come back in 5 years, come back with your contribution, your bank statement, show you can turn over the business plan, you can draw an income. And it's not, we've got to be far more flexible in the way that we approach, and almost like walk side by side through the journey in a way that I don't think the state is currently able to.
Brilliant, thank you. Last 15 minutes questions. Oh, we've got a nice lot of questions, so I'm going to take 3 at a time. The gentleman at the front, the lady in the scarf, and then the other lady at the back.
Thank you, and what an amazing panel. I feel very fired up after it. I'm Trevor McFarlane, I'm the Director of Culture Commons. We specialise in the creative, cultural and heritage sectors, and I don't want to add to Andy Burnham's shopping list, Jim, but I did want to just put on your radar how I think some of the things that are coming through from your contributions actually around pride and joy and culture and creativity and identity and how these are all wrapped up together. I think it's often not included in the policy discourse around devolution, and actually I think when you strip it all back, it's right at the heart of what we're getting at here. So my question is around fiscal devolution, harmonisation of funds and empowerment of communities, which I think could be possibly achieved through organising arm's length bodies that sit under the DCMS family better, to single pot, multi-year, into your combines, empower your mayors to really kickstart devolution, cultural devolution. I should just add, Jim, if I may, because I've got the mic, I'm running a major Four Nations programme on devolution and the creative, cultural and heritage sectors with 30 partners from across the UK who are looking at some of the really boring technical things that I know you're into. So we'd love to share you. We'd really love to share that report with you and meet with you about that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. If you could pass the lady behind you.
Thank you. That was very interesting to hear what each of you had to say. My name is Judith, and I come from the community which has been hollowed out across the water. That doesn't mean in Ireland, it means Birkenhead. I find it very difficult. I'm used to working with people across the spectrum and getting some results. I found it very difficult to work in health locally, work in mental health nationally, internationally. Working with it locally here, impossible. Similarly with the councillors. We have councillors that have been in councillors for 40 years. They don't want you to ask any questions. You're told to sit down. If you haven't told them 3 weeks in advance that you want to ask questions on something, then sit down. You haven't given adequate notice. This is very disempowering. I see the whole place. Birkenhead is a ghost town. It's terrible, absolutely awful, and every year sees it gets worse. How is it possible to work with people? Is there anybody in this room who comes from Birkenhead I can work with? Anybody at all?
Let's pick that up afterwards, because I'm sure I know people. I live this side of the water, but let's pick that up afterwards. Thank you very much for your question. Could you pass it to the lady with the glasses, please?
Thank you very much. This is Grace Duffy from Bridges Outcomes Partnerships. And I wanted to talk a bit about how community organisations can be best made to work for this devolution agenda, and really how they're financed and commissioned. Because the way that sort of a lot of local authority commissioning works at the moment is community organisations kind of made to compete against one another instead of being able to work together and cooperate. And the way that services are commissioned on such short timescales means that these small organisations have to stand down and stand up, and on a really regular basis, it really undermines their ability to deliver those place-based relational services that we all know is what we really need. So I think for Matt and for Frida, the question is, I guess, what's your views? What do you want from central government in terms of how your organisation should be, funded and brought into delivery of services? And for Jim, a kind of specific thing really around the Procurement Act. I'm really concerned that whilst it's welcome, it's not really going to change that situation and really empower local authorities to better involve their community sector. So will you be looking at that with the Cabinet Office in terms of how we can best support places to work with their community sector?
Brilliant set of questions, thank you. I'm going to ask for brief responses from the panel and then just go to the final two that had their hands up previously. So we had a question there about culture and should it be part of the single pot. Maybe that's one for you, Jim, as well as on procurement, and then quality of councillors. Don't know if you want to address that. I'll just sit back.
Just on culture, but I think a real life example of something that's currently going on in Oldham is the Oldham Coliseum Theatre. 180-year-old theatre. People fondly remember the pantomime, and it's created a lot of kind of Coronation Street type. Like regionally, it's very important in terms of our cultural heritage and people's sense of belonging. And there's proposal for a long time to redevelop it into an all singing, all dancing China building like this. That would have been fantastic, but over time and during COVID and inflation goes up and projects become unviable, it gets chipped away and chipped away and chipped away to the point at which it's a shadow of the bid that went forward. to the point where the public just lost faith and confidence in it. And so we took a step back with the council and MPs and others to say, we need to do this in a different way. The protest group was kind of marshalling around it, and I said, but they're not a protest group. It's us, it's our community. People are saying they want a different conversation about the way to go forward. So rather than considering it to be a protest group, because the problem with anything like that is councils, unfortunately, can end up putting the shutters down instead of opening the doors. And my approach with protest is always bring it in, make it a cup of tea, and then kind of talk through the issue. And we did that. And the outcome of that now is that there's not a £20 million project that people don't want, but a £10 million project that people do, which is refurbish the Fairbottom Street Historical Theatre. So the next pantomime will be there, with a new management board in place, with a friends group in place run by a lot of the stars and other people that kind of got behind it. But the special thing about that, if it all works, and it's still in development, so let's see, this is a bit like bear with us while we work through it, because it will be a community cooperative for the Coliseum. You know, if you go to register your child's birth at the registrars in Chadderton Town Hall, you'll be given your birth certificate, and you'll also be given your share for the Oldham Coliseum Cooperative for the kids born in Oldham, and creating that bond and that network to take it forward. I only say that because it's a really good example of councils, often for the right reasons, pursue a particular course here, having the confidence and the maturity to step back and say, we think we need to look at this again. With the community, I think shows a huge amount of maturity. In terms of fiscal devolution of single pots, all departmental budget lines, of which there are about 400, are in scope, including the ones that you mentioned, but we're not going to preempt any discussions that are taking place on that. In terms of competitive bidding, we are committed to single pot multi-year settlements for local government, and our expectation is for your, in particular, civil society partners who are commissioned to deliver, like CAB and other people, if you're given a 3-year funding settlement, the very least we should expect is that those that you commission should be given the same security to. How that works in practice, we'll need to work through and co-produce that, rather than me imposing it through guidance. We should try and work through that. And in terms of councillors, I won't kind of speak about the specifics about your area. I do think that councillors have been disempowered massively and been put in a box of you haven't really got power. At best, you're just articulating a complaint at a local level, but you haven't got the wherewithal to actually resolve the complaint. And I want to change it so backbench councillors who have been sidelined and disempowered and almost taught down as scout group leaders with no real power or influence are raised in profile and status to become frontline councillors, community conveners. And that's about giving them responsibility, giving them respect, building the institutions so the community comes together as a partnership in the council's constitution with resource and support. I think is part of that reshaping the relationship. I could go on at length about Eric Pickles' period in office and how he took away the power of councils to be agents of their own destiny, but that is part of it. About how we kind of rebuild that status of a frontline councillor, a convener, somebody who is pulling together the community to work together to co-produce the answers.
Brilliant, thank you. And Matt, may I come to you on procurement and community organisations?
I'm going to dive through all of them because I think there's some really important points there. First of all, DCMS bodies, yes, it would be interesting to see how they might realign themselves in the context of devolution settlements, and I think also in the context of a changing view of what responsibilities are for communities in relation to MHCLG priorities. And I know, for example, the dormant assets funding that DCMS is responsible for, there's a new community element to that, which Local Trust helped deliver with support from Diana Johnson and the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Left Behind Neighbourhoods. Alex Norris is working on that as an announcement, and that could be something that's quite important and special. But equally, when you look at things like the Community Fund and other philanthropic funders, I'm not picking them out in particular, you find that communities in the lowest 10% of the index of multiple deprivation, who are also in the lowest 10% for social fabric, like community organisations, get 70% less grant funding per head than the rest of the lowest 10% of the IMD. And that's a bit of a complicated way round, but essentially the places that have got community organisations get funding, those that don't. So how do we pump prime that? I think that's an important question. On the NHS, I think the NHS are coming around. We're doing some great work with the NHS Confederation on the role of primary care and building social capacity in communities.
Jim's got to head off to his next event, another event at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Round of applause for Jim, everyone. Thank you. And then we just had a burning question at the back, and anyone else who's got a burning question that could go to Matt or Frida before I close with final remarks. The gentleman at the back there.
Thank you. Majid Neki, I work on economic development in West London. Andy Burnham said earlier we're in early days for English devolution, which is absolutely right. But in London, as always, we're a bit weird, and we're coming up to middle age with coming up to 25 years of the GLA Act, and we haven't got the same structure. We haven't got the integration between the mayor and the local authorities. We don't have an MCA, but we have plenty of communities like those that you've talked about, Frida, and lots of the same challenges. So I wondered if you had any reflections from Big Local and Local Trust as to how projects have navigated those differences in the capital, and what we could learn from that.
Brilliant. Can I come to Matt and then Frida, and it's kind of
I
with
think
closing remarks?
Frida can have the last word. Okay, so I think two things to say. First of all, London is challenging because of the nature of the communities, the nature of the people who live there, hyper-diversity, hyper-turnover of populations. The challenge is very different, but I do know in Camden, where I live, Georgia Gould in particular took a lead in really looking at how you could build community and community fabric in the places that are most challenged. And I think there's probably a lot to learn from that. I think there's a lot to learn from this panel, because actually often when everything falls apart, it's people in communities who are the last one left standing, who are there, who need to hold it together. And, we've all seen the politicians have gone because they've got other things to do. But if you're living in a community, you can't walk away from that. And in many ways, that's the story of Sale West, isn't it? When I first visited Sale West in 2017, it was a half-mothballed, decrepit community centre filled with people who wanted to do something, that they were just getting started. Outside the back door were a couple of burnt mattresses. It all looked really a bit rough, and you go out there, there's new development, there's public art, it's pristine, it's been driven by an incredible group of people who've just taken an estate by the scruff of the neck and turned it round, to the extent that the council at one point was looking to want to embed staff in your community organisation because of your outreach,
How the tables turn.
So, I would just advise people to go to Sale West, see the brilliant work they've done. What would you say you're most proud of?
Oh, good heavens. So many things. I mean, like I said, we counted up the projects we've done, about 75 different things under the 4 different headings. It's just grown and grown, and at first we were quite timid. I think the business of risk, if you give people who've not really got an awful lot of money, you suddenly give them the prospect of £1 million, which actually it's not a lot of money, actually over 10 years, but at first you just feel to take a risk, to invest anything, it seems terrible. It's like if something costs £10,000, now we realise that's probably a pretty good investment, but at the beginning, to get used to that, it took a while. People were too timid and maybe thought, oh, couldn't possibly spend £10,000, you know what a lot of money that is. So I think in the middle of all this is communication. We have been lucky because our councillors, we've got 2 Tory councillors and 1 Labour councillor, but we've never thought of them like that. We just thought of them as councillors, and we've been so lucky with them because they have been helpful and proactive, as has our local council. We've always had good relationships with them. But prior to Big Local, we had something called the Sale West and Ashton Partnership, which is where we invited representatives of the police, schools, social work, the council, to come once a month and sit around the table with us. And we had a kind of round table where we each said what was going on, just brought everybody up to date on what initiatives were going on. So we began to learn about each other. And because we were part of that, and actually we had initiated that, it gave us some kind of status, a bit of standing. We didn't have any money or anything, but we did begin to have some influence. So I think you've just got to start small, you've got to communicate, you've got to develop and learn from people, but you need a lot of support with that. and obviously money if you can get it.
The amazing thing was that, you know, probably only 6 or 7 years ago, you were saying to the council, please don't let this community centre close. It was on its last legs. If the central heating was 60 years old, if it bust, that was it. There was no way to mend it because no one knew how to mend the boiler because it was 60 years old. There were no plans. And now you're talking to the council saying, we will not let this community centre close. It's too important. There's a real recognition there of the importance of the work you've been doing. And frankly, that's what I'm proud of because it's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for sharing that experience, Frida, and all your impact that you've had. I would like to sign up my team, IPPR North, to come and visit Sale West. So if you want to follow, lead by example. If anybody wants to join us, please do reach out. And thank you. I think it's been a really rich discussion, hearing at the national level, the commitment to devolution, the regional level, Andy's ambition grows and grows, and then I think, you know, showing how things can happen from the bottom up in any case, but there's a huge potential also for the community, you know, level and spirit to join up with what's being offered at the regional level. So a lot of excitement. We're steaming ahead on devolution, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.